if we could truly comprehend God's mind, his strength, his absolute purity, and his kindness all at once,
Mhm.
if those perfect attributes were just laid bare before our finite senses, would we even be able to stand?
That's that's a powerful question. I don't think we could. It is an overwhelming thought, isn't it? The sheer flawless perfection of the divine nature.
It really is. And the contemplation of it, I think, is precisely what shifts knowledge from just, detached theology into something deeply heart-moving and genuinely life-altering.
Absolutely. For the Puritan writers, and especially for Charnock, knowing God wasn't just about assembling facts, it was about engaging the entire soul.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Our focus today isn't just intellectual, it's intensely devotional. We're moving beyond the contemplation of God's absolute being, which is what we explored in the earlier parts of this series, to look at his glorious perfections that are actively touching our lives every single day.
Yes, we want to understand the nature of the God who governs us.
And we are, of course, continuing our deep dive into Stephen Charnock's monumental work, The Existence and Attributes of God.
A work where you can feel he's fundamentally a pastor in print. His core mission was not simply to inform the understanding, but to move the heart toward, well, holy obedience, faith, love, and a profound humility born out of genuine awe.
And this is part 3 of our 4-part series. Today, we're going to confront 4 immense and glorious perfections that define how God relates to his creation and to us.
His wisdom, his power, his holiness, and his goodness.
Get ready, because these are some of the richest and most practical attributes we can possibly consider. So we're starting with God's wisdom. And the initial description Charnock gives of this is it's so foundational. It casts God not merely as a smart entity, but as the universal director of everything.
Right.
From the smallest atom to the grandest arc of human history and redemption.
That's the key distinction, isn't it? Human wisdom is specialized. We can find a wise tradesman or a wise philosopher or a wise statesman, but they're wise in their own little corner.
Yeah, you wouldn't ask the philosopher to fix your plumbing.
Exactly. But God's wisdom is, in Charnock's words, only wise universally. It's an essential, unsegmented perfection. It doesn't confine itself to one domain, but it hovers over everything, shines in every being, directing all the motions of his will and all the executions of his power.
So it's not just that God is wise about some things. His very nature is wisdom, and it acts as the necessary governor of his unlimited power.
Precisely. And this leads directly to the definition of wisdom as the unchangeable rule of action. God's absolute power is not unruly, it's not chaotic, it is perfectly ordered by his wisdom.
So his wisdom ensures that nothing is ever done but what is fitting, convenient, and completely agreeable to so excellent a being.
Yes, just as his righteousness necessitates what is just, his wisdom necessitates what is congruous and fit.
You know, that distinction between the will of God being the principle of his action and wisdom being the rule of those actions, that's critical for anyone seeking certainty, isn't it?
It is. If wisdom is the perfect rule, it naturally gives us the immutability of his decrees. His counsel stands immovable.
Which should provide immense comfort.
Oh, absolutely. Charnock makes a stunning argument here. He says wisdom is a bar to changing his purposes. Think about it. If God were ever to change his mind, what would that imply?
It would imply a flaw in the original plan.
A flaw, exactly. A lack of foresight, a finding of some inconvenience or maybe a better option presented itself later. And that is completely impossible for an infinitely wise God.
So the punchline for you, the listener, is this. God never has to issue a software update. His initial decree is permanently perfect.
That's a great way to put it. To think he changed for the better means he wasn't wise enough before. To think he changed for the worse means he isn't as wise now.
Right.
And since he is sovereignly wise, he sees no cause of reversing anything. And this gives us that unshakable certainty that the universe is governed not by some rash, brute power, but by a wisdom that is already complete.
And speaking of that perfect governance, if wisdom is the blueprint for the universe, where does Charnock suggest we first look to read that blueprint? He directs us straight to the cosmos itself.
He does, describing creation rather beautifully as a poem.
I love that, a poem.
Yeah, the word used, poiemasi, which we often translate as works, really signifies a work of skill or an artistic creation. It's a poem, not just brute labor.
So the whole creation is treated like a masterwork.
Yes. Every species is a stanza, and every individual creature is a verse in it, showcasing God's skill the way a composer showcases their wit and fancy.
And we see that skill in the the fitness and usefulness of everything for its end, Charnock insists that upon diligent inspection, nothing is found superfluous or defective.
Nothing. He says the least creature glitters with a beam of divine skill.
He uses these wonderful visual examples.
He does. Look at the earth itself. The wisdom is seen in how its parts are fitted together for human habitation and sustenance. The valleys are appointed for granaries, the mountains provide shadow and generate rivers.
And those rivers, like veins, carry refreshment to every member of this body.
Exactly. The sea isn't just chaos. It's fitted as a great fish pond for man's use. It's all determined to some particular useful end, never produced at random.
It's the ultimate expression of sophisticated engineering, all pointing to a singular, perfect mind. It certainly makes you want to subscribe to the psalmist. O Lord, how manifold are thy works! In wisdom hast thou made them all.
And the same wisdom that structured the world is applied to governing it, particularly through the perfect law he has given us.
Which, he argues, are not just an arbitrary act of pure authority.
No, not at all. They're an act of wisdom and goodness respecting man's ultimate benefit. They are inherently perfective of our nature. They rejoice the heart and enlighten the eyes because they fit the shape of the human soul.
And this wisdom accommodates his law to all mankind, not just one culture or one people.
Right. Everything that is disturbing to human society is provided against. The laws against murder, theft, false witness, these aren't culturally bound. They are universally beneficial.
The reflection Charnock gives on the law is almost utopian. He says, if the law which is summed up in the commandment to love were well observed, it would alter the face of the world from a brutish to a human world.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
It would exchange lion-like and wolfish dispositions for reason and sweetness. A powerful illustration of the inherent goodness and wisdom embedded in the divine standard.
So God designed them so that obedience naturally draws forth his goodness.
And it prevents the necessity of those smarting judgments, which only become necessary when a creature refuses to comply with the standard designed for its own thriving.
Okay, wait, so let me make sure I understand the complexity here. We see wisdom in a perfectly functioning cosmos and in a perfectly constructed law. But where it gets really interesting is applying this wisdom to the mystery of redemption.
Yes.
A process based entirely on failure and sin.
This is truly the peak, the highest revelation of divine wisdom. It takes the darkest acts of sin, for instance, the devil inspiring people to kill Christ, the Son of God, and it overrules them to accomplish God's own design of redemption.
The cross becomes the scene where God's ultimate righteousness is satisfied.
And the very womb of man's recovery. It's turning the betrayal of Judas, the malice of the high priests, and the failure of Peter into the exact means by which God achieves his greatest preordained purpose.
That's just staggering.
And that providential wisdom doesn't just apply globally. Charnock points out that God even uses a believer's own sin to bring them to greater faith and humility.
How does that work?
Well, providential wisdom makes a sin which inherently fits us for hell an occasion to fit us for heaven. It happens when that failure leads to a more humble faith and a more thorough sanctification.
Can you give us an example of that?
Think of David's fall. The stirring of that corruption, though it was terrible, it makes the mud at the bottom of his soul appear. It brings the soul to self-abhorrence and indignation against sin. God makes the devil a polisher, while he intends to be a destroyer.
So the temporary failure forces the soul to rely completely on grace. It drives out self-confidence.
Exactly. It's incredible. But the foundation of all of this, the great mind-bending mystery, is the paradox of the mediator. The union of two complete natures in Christ.
Finite and infinite.
Immortality and mortality. Immutability with a nature subject to change. This union is incomprehensible to our logic, but it is the foundation of the union between God and fallen man. This wisdom ensured that Christ was perfectly suited to every one of our needs.
So why did he need both natures to accomplish this goal?
Yeah, think about it. Had he been only man, even a perfect man, he couldn't have assured us an approach to the infinite holy God. His offering would have been finite.
It wouldn't have been enough.
Not nearly. And had he been only God, his justice would have been too terrible and overwhelming for guilty, polluted people like us to approach.
We couldn't handle it.
No. But as God-man, his mercy is secured by the human nature, making him approachable. As man, he was in a state to obey the law and suffer its penalty. As God, his obedience and suffering were infinite, valuable enough to be imputed to the whole world of believers.
So the power of conveying grace comes from his divinity, and the manner of conveyance is through his humanity.
Perfectly put. This wisdom provided the perfect suitability of the mediator for a people who needed a bridge that spanned an infinite gulf.
And this leads to that most profound theological observation from Charnock.
The one about the two seemingly contradictory affections.
Right, manifested at the same time. The greatest hatred of sin and the greatest love for the sinner. How does God demonstrate the greatest hatred of sin in this moment?
By punishing it, imputed in his own Son. Charnock argues that this act showed a stronger detestation of sin than if every individual sinner had suffered eternal torments himself.
How so? That's a huge claim.
It is, but think it through. When sin was merely imputed to his beloved Son, God would still bring the full, unmitigated weight of hell upon his soul. The love for his Son was not strong enough to cause him to waive the demands of justice.
Because the holiness of his nature was stronger than even that paternal affection.
Stronger. And yet, simultaneously, the greatest love for the sinner is shown by advancing the repenting believer to a happiness that exceeds the first estate Adam had lost.
He is at eternal defiance with sin.
Yet nearer in alliance with the reconciled sinner than he was before the original revolt. It is a wisdom that achieves the happy restoration of the broken relationship while simultaneously placing an everlasting curse upon that which caused the breach.
That's the ultimate wisdom and prudence of grace abounding. So, moving from the certainty of God's perfect plan, which is his wisdom, we now confront the sheer irresistibility of the strength required to enact that plan. His power, or omnipotence.
Yes, and this is meant to inspire immediate, unshakable trust and complete submission.
The nature of divine power is defined as the ability and strength whereby he can bring to pass whatsoever his infinite wisdom can direct.
And it's not authority alone, which is the right to command, but it's the strength to actually execute the command.
And this power is a capacity, right? Not just an executed act. The power is always infinitely greater than anything he has actually done.
That's right. Power is an infinite capacity to act whatsoever. He's able to will. It extends far beyond the scope of creation or redemption itself. His power is as immense as his will.
And the way he acts just underscores its perfection. He works without difficulty, without resistance, without labor. He just acts what he wills only by his will.
No mechanical instruments, no external assistance, and we have to emphasize the radical nature of creation here. He needs no time to work in because he is eternal, and critically, he needs no pre-existing matter to work upon.
Creating the world and everything in it of nothing.
That requires an infinite virtue and power that surpasses all human analogy.
But let me push back on that idea of infinite power for a moment, this idea of power being an infinite capacity. How does Charnock ensure that capacity doesn't translate into recklessness? What are the theological safeguards in place to keep raw, brute power from becoming tyranny?
That is where the other attributes become the necessary limits. God cannot do evil or deny himself.
But isn't that a contradiction, an inability?
It's not weakness, though. It is an inability arising from infinite perfection. It is an inability of rectitude, not of feebleness.
That's a powerful distinction. He gives the analogy of a fountain, right? You wouldn't count a sweet fountain impotent because it cannot send forth bitter streams.
Precisely. He would not be truly omnipotent if he could do evil, because those would be marks of weakness, disorder, and internal contradiction, not characters of majesty. His power is infinitely strong, just as his wisdom is infinitely clear and his will is infinitely pure. They can't shock one against another.
And we see this omnipotence not just in the one-time act of creation, but in the ongoing act of governing and sustaining the universe, influencing what Charnock calls second causes.
Right.
For those of us not steeped in 17th century physics, what exactly does Charnock mean by second causes, and why is God's influential concurrence so necessary?
Second causes is simply anything in the created order. The sun, gravity, a plant growing, or a person making a decision. God is the first cause. Charnock argues that God maintains a perpetual derivation of power to everything. Without his influential concurrence, his constant moment-by-moment infusion of power, all the wheels of creation would stand idle the same instant.
So God isn't just a clockmaker who wound up the universe and walked away?
Not at all. He is the sustaining engine behind every single mechanical and biological process. The sun could not run one stride, nor fire devour a straw, without God actively empowering that event.
So if he simply withdraws his influencing power from their qualities,
Their motion ceases, like what happened when the sun stood still for Joshua. He is not just directing, he is fueling.
that makes the ordinary acts of nature as marvelous as the miracles.
They absolutely are. Charnock asks, is not the chemical creation of a delicious, intoxicating grape from dry earth, insipid rain, and a sour vine as admirable a token of divine power as turning water into wine?
It is.
What we call nature is simply God supporting, directing, and moving the instrument according to his law.
And this immense power extends to the realm of human will and society. He says God has an omnipotent hand that grasps and turns the hearts of all men, even the most powerful kings, to his own ends.
Think about the stability of civilization. It is a mighty remark of God's power to make millions of strong and often discontented persons submit to the yoke of government, often to the authority of one individual who might be weaker or unwiser than themselves.
It's a miracle it works at all.
It is. The same hand that assuages the waves of the sea, a chaotic force, suppresses the tumults of the people, turning hearts and wills to his own purposes, whether they are aware of his governance or not.
When we turn to redemption, we see the ultimate triumphs of this divine power, because here the power meets resistance.
Huge resistance. Consider the sheer success of propagating the Christian doctrine. The gospel was propagated despite being preached by mean and ignorant persons,
Who were mocked as babblers by the sophisticated Athenian philosophers.
Yet this simple, despised message succeeded against philosophical wisdom, deep-seated prejudice, established worldly pomp, and the active persecution of empires.
This success evidences divine power because it proves the source wasn't the clever invention of man.
No, it was the revelation of Christ copied from the bosom of the Father and backed by irresistible might. But the ultimate act of divine power is conversion.
This is turning the heart of man against the strength of the inclinations of nature.
Exactly. Charnock stresses the contrast between creation and conversion.
That is the crucial difference. In creation, the dust contributed nothing to the action and offered no resistance to God's forming hand.
But in conversion, the whole strength of corrupt nature is alarmed to combat against the power of his grace. The will is perverse, the mind contrives against it, and all of nature resists.
He says to still the fierceness of nature, silencing the swelling waves of the heart, is a greater miracle than many physical healings.
A far greater miracle. That comparison he makes, that converting a hardened human heart is harder than changing a pig into a man, is intense.
It is. What does Charnock intend for the listener to feel when they hear that?
He intends for us to feel the magnitude of divine grace and the depth of human corruption. It is meant to crush human pride and glorify God's mercy. Every converted soul, from Adam onward, is a trophy of the divine conquest.
Because none were pure volunteers.
Not one. They were all drawn by his strong arm, demonstrating that the only way we come to faith is through a powerful supernatural act.
So what does this all mean for us then? For the one who faces the struggles of this world and feels vulnerable, it gives us the comfort of omnipotence.
It grounds our trust against the fear of man. To fear man who is as grass, who cannot think a thought without divine concourse and cannot breathe but by divine power, is forgetfulness, and consequently a slight of that infinite power which founded the earth.
It is making man stronger than God.
Which is absurd. It's a mighty ill nature that distrusts infinite power in the face of infinite wisdom.
And this comfort is especially strong for the church in its lowest estate.
Absolutely. God can create a happy state for the church and raise her from an overwhelming grave, even when enemies seem to trample upon her completely. He often waits for opportunities to deliver where his almightiness may be most conspicuous.
Right. He waited until Israel was upon the brink of the Red Sea.
And Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, and the 3 children were fully committed to the fiery furnace before showing his hand.
The lesson is clear. He will not lack means of deliverance until he lacks the power of working miracles.
And his power is more jealous of its honor than the church can be of her safety.
We move now to the holiness of God. If wisdom is the blueprint and power is the force that executes it, holiness is the essential, necessary standard, the very nature of God that dictates how that power and wisdom are used.
Yes, holiness is described as an essential and necessary perfection. It's as necessary as his very being. He is necessarily without sin.
There can be no contradiction in the divine nature.
None. Which would be the case if God knew what was right and yet acted wrongly. He cannot but hate sin. It is more opposite to him than light is to darkness or fire is to water.
And that abhorrence is necessary. Why?
Because he necessarily loves himself for his own perfect excellency and holiness. If he did not hate sin, he would implicitly hate himself, because sin seeks to deface his image and contradicts his essence. His abhorrence of sin isn't a choice. It's a free and necessary act arising from an infinite knowledge of his own perfect nature.
And this inherent opposition leads directly to the necessity of justice.
It has to. Punishment of unholiness is not a choice, but a requirement. It is as much against his nature not to punish sin as it is against his nature not to loathe it.
And again, we go back to redemption for the ultimate proof.
Always. God so hated sin that when it was imputed to his Son without any personal commission of it, he would bring a hell upon his soul. The purity of his nature demanded satisfaction.
Now, when discussing the fall of man, Charnock is careful to maintain God's holiness in the face of human tragedy. He states clearly there is no divine compulsion to sin.
Absolutely not. Sin cannot be committed by force. It is purely voluntary. God cannot pollute any undefiled creature. Man was created defectible, meaning he had the ability to fall.
But God did not determine his apostasy by any positive inward compulsion.
No. God placed Adam in a free posture. The law given was easy to be observed, suited to his original strength, and guarded by a dreadful penalty, making the stakes absolutely clear.
But doesn't the fact that God knew man would violate the law perhaps stain his holiness? That's a common objection.
Charnock says absolutely not. The law itself was holy, just, and good, and its non-observance came from a want of will in man, not a want of power originally given by God.
He uses that righteous magistrate analogy.
Yes, a just magistrate must still make good laws even if he foresees violations. To refrain from making laws simply because he foresees disobedience would cease to be the act of a wise governor. The blame falls entirely upon man for seeking out ruining inventions.
So, with this high standard set, how do we, in our fallen state, challenge this divine holiness in the creature, even today? What are the practical ways we slight this attribute?
Well, the first way is through unworthy representations. God's holiness is injured when men imagine him as they would have him, rather than as he is revealed to be.
We try to slander God in their thoughts to protect our own lusts.
Exactly. In Charnock's time, that meant pagan idols. Today, it means framing a version of God that is convenient for our bad habits. They fancy a God winking or smiling at their impurities, creating a lax deity who is complicit in their sin.
That terrifying line from the psalmist applies here. Thou thoughtest that I was altogether such an one as thyself.
It's the spring and nurse of all impiety, allowing people to commit wickedness with an unbounded licentiousness because they have stripped God of his necessary excellency for their own security.
And the second great slighting of holiness is depending on our imperfect services to reconcile us to God.
Yes, depending on formal prayers or our own works, what the apostle calls dross and dung, to bear us out before God's tribunal. This is a blasphemy against this attribute.
Because it acts as if the holy God would be content with our half-hearted impurities and imperfections.
It's setting up a gilded Dagon, our own righteousness, as a fit companion for the ark of his holiness. It suggests God's standard is so low that our broken efforts are sufficient.
That's powerful imagery. But the flip side of this rigorous standard is incredible blessing for the humble believer who recognizes their own lack of purity.
Indeed. Because purity is the most precious thing in God's esteem, he certainly values every holy soul. He looks upon the upright with a full and open face of favor, as if he had no pleasure in anything else.
He sets apart the godly for himself.
As a peculiar object of delight, the holy soul becomes as lovely in his account as before it was loathsome, once sin is dealt with through Christ.
And this attribute renders God venerable. It provides a necessary motive for reverence.
It does. Magnificent thoughts of his holiness awaken actual reverence and worship. Charnock connects a lack of reverence to loose, unbecoming behavior in church wanderings of the mind, and a confusion of internal languages in prayer.
So if you truly grasp the absolute purity of the one you are addressing,
your demeanor, both inner and outer, must change.
So the key application is the exhortation to conformity. If God's nature is holiness, we must labor after conformity.
We can't be essentially holy, but we must aim for the same kind of holiness, the same truth of it. We are called to imitate God himself, the original of all purity.
Like a short line that is as straight as an infinitely long one.
What a great picture. We must aspire after a divine life, choosing the highest goodness and purity as the pattern. Our reverence will arrive at greater degrees if every act of duty is seasoned with the thought of God sitting upon a throne of necessary holiness.
Now we turn to the final attribute for this deep dive, God's goodness. If holiness is the standard of his purity, goodness is the infinite fountain from which all benefits flow to his creation.
And Charnock asserts that God is only originally good, good of himself. His goodness has no spring. It is not derived from another. It is self-existent.
All created goodness, whether in man, angels, or nature, is merely a rivulet from this infinite fountain.
Exactly. God gives all and receives nothing to enhance his own perfection.
And this goodness encompasses everything, even the acts we might perceive as harsh. We often separate goodness from justice, but Charnock argues that God's justice is an essential part of his goodness.
This is so important. If we don't understand God's justice, we miss half of his goodness. Goodness must necessarily hate evil because evil is destructive to the creation he loves.
So justice is required to put the world back in order.
To reduce those who will not be in the order of obedience to the order of suffering. So justice isn't the opposite of kindness, it's the necessary infrastructure.
Right. Without moral rules enforced, the world doesn't just get messy, it descends into moral chaos.
And if God were not just, he could not be truly good, because he would be impotent to protect the righteous or maintain order. Justice is necessary to preserve human society. The goodness of innocent blood demands justice, and therefore executing that justice is not a badness in the sovereign of the world.
In fact, Charnock argues that as wisdom without goodness is serpentine craft, goodness without justice is impotent indulgence.
Which would ultimately cast things into confusion. A God who ignored moral violation would be a weak and deficient God. Thus, God's goodness is perfect because it contains the structural element of justice.
The peak of this goodness, of course, is seen in redemption. Charnock calls the goodness shown there pure because it was not indigent.
Meaning God was under no obligation whatsoever to pity our misery and repair our ruins. He might have stood to the terms of the first covenant, exacting our eternal death, and still remain perfectly good and righteous.
The goodness was pure, streaming out of itself. There was no necessity to restore man.
Absolutely none. He could have as easily destroyed the world and reared another, and it would not have been unbecoming his divine goodness to have let man perpetually wallow in the misery he courted. No goodness in us served as the motive. His goodness was the sheer, spontaneous fountain of our benefit.
This makes the condition for receiving this goodness so remarkable, the reasonable condition of faith and repentance.
It is goodness to require such a slight and reasonable condition. Repent and believe for the greatest benefit imaginable. It's so reasonable, Charnock argues, that the creature would be obliged to perform it even if God didn't require it.
Simply because the excellency of the truth disclosed calls for credit to be given.
Right. It is an act of amazing condescension. He lets us into the fruits of Christ's death upon a condition so slight that every rational person must count it reasonable.
And this goodness is eminent in the physical practices he gave us, particularly the sacraments.
Especially the Lord's Supper. God gives his Son not just as a sacrifice upon the cross, but as a feast upon the table for the nourishment of our souls. He complies with our physical senses.
He instructs us by the eye, allowing us to taste and feel him as well as hear him. He veils his glory under earthly elements, bread and wine,
Informing our understanding in the mysteries of salvation by signs familiar to our senses. It is the most exquisite, dainty food God can feed us with. That blood which satisfied justice, washed away guilt, and secured us against the terrors of death. It is God bending down to our fragile physical humanity to impart the highest spiritual benefit.
Beyond redemption, divine goodness is evident in his general providence toward the world, in his universal care.
God has a general goodness to all. He is the nurse of all creatures. The whole world swims in his rich bounty, and he neglects nothing. The goodness of God is the ever-flowing river that waters the whole earth.
And this universal care even extends to things that seem directly harmful to us, like temptation and suffering.
We circle back to that beautiful idea. God makes the devil a polisher while he intends to be a destroyer. Temptations, even if they discover the treachery lurking in our hearts, prevent the pride of our spirit.
God uses those means that drive us into his own arms when we sat too loose before.
Exactly. We have reason to bless God for the assaults from hell, as well as for pure mercies from heaven, because both are tools of his goodness.
And finally, his patience towards sinners. Charnock insists this patience is strong, not feeble. How do we know it isn't weakness?
Because he that created a world in 6 days could crush all mankind in 1 minute with ease. God's patience is not faint-hearted or feeble. It is restrained by his wisdom and goodness, not by a lack of power to revenge.
He gives warning because he desires to be prevented from striking.
Yes, he lifts up his hand before he strikes, that men might see and avert the stroke. His threatenings have not so much of a black flag of malice as of an olive branch of hope. He fights with men by the sword of his mouth, his warnings and judgments, that he might not be forced to pierce them by the ultimate sword of his wrath.
This is goodness in action, providing time and opportunity for repentance.
It truly is.
So if we apply this goodness to our lives, Charnock says it is the principal motive for our trust.
Indeed. His power without goodwill would be terrifyingly dangerous. His goodwill without power would be useless. Goodness is what makes the promise cheerfully and confidently relied upon.
It is a mighty ill nature that receives not with assurance the dictates of infinite goodness,
which is often more abundant in the inclinations of the promiser than can even be fully expressed in the words of the promise itself.
And a deep sense of this goodness would also make us patient under miseries and sufferings.
Goodness can never intend ill, but designs good in all its acts to them that love God. When we lose what we love, God snatched it away, perhaps because we did not see the viper or the gilded poison that would have harmed us.
Our sufferings are often intended as preparations for greater goodness and are always followed by rich mercies.
And when God takes away outward comforts, he takes no more than what his goodness first imparted, and he never takes away himself.
That's the ultimate comfort. While he snatches away the rattles we play with, he has a breast in himself for us to suck. The suffering is a disease, not a hell. It is a cloud, not a total darkness. We have completed a breathtaking look at the perfections of God today. The certainty of his wisdom, the irresistibility of his power, the necessary standard of his holiness, and the pure fountain of his goodness.
And we see how these attributes are not four separate concepts, but twist together seamlessly. His power ordered by his wisdom, and both constrained by his necessary holiness, all flowing forth in his boundless goodness, especially in the perfect design of redemption.
Charnock's aim in these elaborate discourses was ultimately to promote holiness and stir us up to love and live for the God of his praise.
It absolutely was.
As you process these glorious perfections, we want to leave you with a couple of reflection questions, just to allow these truths to move from your mind to your heart.
First, considering God's universal wisdom in creation and law, where are you most tempted to think God is wrong or unwise in his dealings with you or the world? What event are you struggling to fit into his perfect design?
And second, if every converted soul is truly a trophy of God's conquering power against the immense stubbornness of the human heart, how does meditating on this overwhelming power change your approach to prayer for those you believe are too far gone?
Great questions for reflection and for devotion.
Next time, we will conclude our deep dive into Charnock's magnum opus by examining the implications of God's supreme rule. We will be looking at his sovereignty, his dominion, and how his patience secures the believer's life.
You won't want to miss how these final attributes fit together. Join us then.